Welcome to a very special edition of Palace Confidential to mark our 50th episode. For this golden jubilee of sorts, we decided to look back at some of the best bits of the best royal programme around. I'm Jo Elvin, and here's just some of what's coming up. When interviewing a prince, it sometimes pays to ask your riskiest question. Royal biographers spill the beans. And we tried the Queen's gin and Charles's honey, but were they any good? And while Prince Charles is pictured as a topless poldark, Sarah Vine warns us of the perils of big-bosomed brides. Well, our royals like to present an image of wisdom and decorum, but as we know, they don't always get it right. In a somewhat bumpy year for Prince Harry, he got it spectacularly wrong when pranksters called pretending to be environmentalist Greta Thunberg and criticised Donald Trump and the tabloid media.
You know, I don't mind saying this to you guys. I think the mere fact that Donald Trump is pushing the coal industry so big in America, he has blood on his hands, because the effect that has on the climate and on the island nations far, far away, again, out of sight, out of mind.
The prank call was very unfortunate, and it's one of those things that you leave yourself wide open to if you're moving out of the system. Now, had Harry been at Frogmore Cottage, that call could well have been put through either the Buckingham Palace switchboard or the Windsor Castle switchboard, and there would have been a safety net. But instead they are on Vancouver Island, they're in rented accommodation. Somehow the pranksters got hold of the phone number and dialed right through.
And when it comes to royals getting their PR badly wrong, right up near the top of our list has to be poor old Peter Phillips and his milk advert, which he might have thought would only be seen in China.
我是 Peter Phillips， 我爱喝娟山鲜牛奶，100年来质优娟山，英伦珍品，奢享鲜醇。
This is what I drink.
When I saw that ad, I thought this has got to be a spoof. I just couldn't believe it was real. But when we did checks and we found out actually he really had recorded this excruciating milk ad for Chinese TV. And now we know why. I mean, he was obviously trying to build up some funds to pay for this divorce.
Well, of course, those slip-ups paled in comparison to that Prince Andrew interview for Newsnight, which public relations experts said ended his royal career.
I think the idea of PRing Prince Andrew back into public life is one of the most impossible thoughts any human can have. It clearly is over for him, and the negative narrative hangs over like a nasty spell. I think it's now what he does in retirement. He is not someone who is fit for a PR campaign.
Well, more on Andrew later, but to the issue dominating the news this year, no prizes for guessing COVID-19. It even became a royal issue when the 71-year-old heir to the throne contracted the virus. We asked a former Buckingham Palace doctor to fill us in on how healthcare works in the royal household.
So the royal family has an extensive medical team that look after every element of their health. They have fantastic consultants, all coordinated through the Queen's Apothecary, Dr. Tim Evans, who's a wonderful doctor. And they do have their medicals, just like a lot of British people do. Lots of companies give annual medicals, and just like a company, the palace does that for their staff. He will be thinking very similarly to the general population. I've got this virus, what should I be doing? And he'll be following the advice that the government and all the NHS staff have been telling the whole population.
And this got us thinking about the staff who run the Queen's household with so many different roles and antiquated titles, my favourite, by the way, being the groom of the stool. We thought it best to ask Richard Kay for a who's who of palace staff.
There are approximately 500 staff at Buckingham Palace, and a lot of them are interchangeable, especially between Windsor Castle and the palace, because the Queen spends so much time at Windsor. The staff from the palace go down, the pages, the dressers, they will all travel to wherever the Queen is. Probably the most important is the Master of the Household, who is one of the Queen's most senior courtiers. Below the Master of the Household, you have all those individual members of staff whose roles are so important. I'm thinking in particular here of the pages. Below the pages, you get junior pages and you get senior footmen, And then you come down the tree, you get to the ordinary footman, their junior footman, really. That's your entry level at Buckingham Palace as a young man.
Well, author Tom Quinn has spent many years interviewing palace staff, collecting stories about members of the royal family that normally wouldn't see the light of day. Here's just one of his favourites.
Diana, who loved the sun. I mean, back in the 80s, 90s, nobody worried about skin cancer. So as soon as everybody got out there to try and get a suntan, she used to love bathing. There is a flat roof with a sort of hedge around it. Outside, it was outside her apartment, not on the ground floor of Kensington Palace, and she could sunbathe naked there without risk of anyone seeing her. But one day there was some building work going on, and it just happened that the angles, the sight lines, it meant that some builders working nearby could actually see her, and she stood up about to go back into the palace, and suddenly their eyes met. The builders could see her, she could see the builders, and I thought it was marvellous. The builders just bowed to give her time to get away, and I thought it was such a sweet story.
It's one thing interviewing a page, but what about getting stories out of a prince? Royal biographer Angela Levin tells us the great lengths she went to in order to win the favour of Prince Harry.
You've got to ingratiate yourself to somebody in a nice way. I took a risk because they were giving me a very short time to see him, and I felt that if I asked a good question, I could keep him with me for longer. So my first question, which was daring, and I realised he could throw me out, was, I've seen how brilliant you are with people of all ages who have been damaged in some way, particularly if they've been damaged psychologically. And I wondered whether you were also using this opportunity to talk to them to help yourself with your own issues. Total silence, and I thought, oops, I'm going to be thrown out. Waited what seemed like ages, and he said, that's a very big question. And I waited again, and he said, you're right, of course. And that for me put the whole book, the interview, on a different plane, where he would see that I didn't want to just ask him what he ate for dinner last night, or trivial, silly questions that he'd been asked hundreds of times before.
And it was Groundhog Day for one royal writer this year. The Mail's editor-at-large, Richard Kay, was a royal correspondent at the time of Princess Diana's extraordinary Panorama interview with Martin Bashir. And 25 years on, here he is covering the story again in light of some of the shocking new revelations about how the interview came about.
Diana was not very good at keeping secrets at the best of times. She loved relating information when she had it. But the fact that she managed to keep this project under wraps for at least two and a half months possibly was one thing. But obviously the context was another. She reassured her friends, she reassured her staff that there would be no shocks in it. But in fact, the whole thing was shocking from minute 1 to minute 60.
So there have long been concerns about subterfuge involved in this interview 25 years ago, but Charles Spencer has really blown the lid on it this week. He alleges that the journalist Martin Bashir faked documents which purported to say that senior courtiers were being paid by the security services to spy on his sister. And this was all done in an effort to persuade Diana to give him the scoop of the century.
The BBC have promised a full and searching inquiry into the allegations about how Martin Bashir obtained his interview with Princess Diana all those years ago. This came about because of the result of Earl Spencer, Diana's brother, releasing information that in fact that he released to me in the Daily Mail. Bashir is said by Spencer to have made a string of allegations, quite poisonous allegations, about members of the royal family and, crucially, members of Diana's circle. And there is an urgency now because Number 10 have piled in and said it is right and proper for the BBC to hold this inquiry, but they've got to get on with it. Bashir, we know, has been recovering from serious ill health. He's had quadruple heart surgery. He's had COVID-related problems too. But nevertheless, he was photographed in the Mail's sister paper, The Mail, on Sunday at the weekend, walking down the street with a takeaway meal. So either he's unwell and can't answer questions, or he's better, in which case we need to hear from Bashir. Obviously, what Martin Bashir has to say will be central to the inquiry too.
Well, another of our experts who has got to know the royals personally over many years is veteran writer Robert Hardman, and he spent time with Princess Anne this year for a documentary ahead of her 70th birthday.
When I was small, we had to pick things and then press them and identify them. And I don't think anybody does that anymore. And I was thinking, might be a good idea if we started doing that again. Haven't seen hide nor hair of them at that suggestion.
In the run-up to her birthday, I thought, well, it really is time that we had a programme focused on her. And we wanted to see the princess both at home and at work and really just give the people a glimpse of someone who we all think we know, but we don't really know that well at all. She's very much a princess for the modern age. There are hundreds of organisations and thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people who've been the beneficiary of what she's done for her more than 300 organisations, and she continues to be as devoted to them as she ever had.
Well, Princess Anne's not the only royal who's been hard at work this year. Despite the pandemic, we've seen the firm out in full force.
Interesting listening to all your tales and stories, and I'm very impressed by what you have achieved already. So I'm very glad to have been able to join you today.
The phrase I've often heard is pickers who are stickers.
Why are you at Windsor Castle today? What is going on over there?
I'm a very lucky girl because I've just had an exclusive tour at Windsor Castle, viewing some of the new attractions they have for members of the public to attract them back in post-lockdown. And the most notable of these is the East Terrace Gardens. Now, no members outside of the public, nobody outside of the royal family, in fact, have walked into these gardens for almost 40 years.
That was our royal correspondent, Rebecca English, who has been keeping us updated on all the royal news throughout this entire year. There were fun trips to Windsor, but there was also the small matter of an FBI manhunt to report on. By far the most thrilling story we have covered on the show this year. Let's take a look. The friend of Prince Andrew, the alleged pimp for Jeffrey Epstein. She's been hiding for the last 12 months, but last Friday, in a dramatic FBI sting operation, Maxwell was caught and taken into custody. Well, the Daily Mail's royal editor, Rebecca English, is Skyping in with us now. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Jo.
So tell us all about this. What does this mean for Ghislaine?
Well, yes, it has been a very dramatic few days on this case. So on Tuesday next week, Ghislaine Maxwell will appear in court in New York via video link from the detention centre in Brooklyn, where she's currently being held. That video link is because of coronavirus. But we may see further developments as early as Friday morning US time, because I'm told that her lawyers will be applying for bail. I'm also told that the prosecutors in the US will be vigorously trying to deny this to her. They believe she is a serious flight risk. She's, after all, she's a multi-millionaire. She has passports from 3 different countries, including the UK. So that's something they don't want to happen.
And with Prince Andrew reportedly very nervous since Maxwell's arrest, we invited former Chief Superintendent and former Head of Security for the Royal Family, Di Davies, to share his thoughts on the matter.
There are so many questions, and we haven't got long enough for the 20 to 30 questions I would like to ask Prince Andrew to clear this up once and for all. I mean, it's been going on for years and years. So this is not a new version. It's merely in these court papers, as I understand it, this lady's name has been revealed for the first time, and she distinctly remembers it, because you don't often step on the toes of a royal prince. And I think that's why, allegedly, she is so vivid in her recollection.
And it turns out having Di Davies on the show with historian Dr. Tessa Dunlop is a recipe for a right royal rumble when it comes to talk about the duchesses.
Now, I have to say, William's wife, Catherine, has adapted incredibly well.
But it's not a fair comparison, is it, Di?
Well,
because Catherine had 10 years of sort of training.
Yes, I hear what you say, and I understand.
And British-born with a sort of like a more
yeah,
innate understanding.
In the public school system.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I understand all of that, and you have a valid point of view. I do think, though, that she has exercised some influence on the way that Harry has actually turned out now, and I don't think...
What wife doesn't die? What wife
absolutely.
doesn't?
Well, I'm lucky. I spent so much time investigating everything. I was hardly home, so my poor wife has suffered
Secret of a happy
dreadfully.
marriage.
Well, yes, absolutely.
Di is a great sport and just one of many brilliant panellists who have joined the show's lively discussions. Here are some of the highlights, starting off with some discussion about Princess Beatrice's wedding.
It's a very pretty dress and she looked beautiful in it, actually. It is quite difficult. As a lady myself with quite large bosoms, they're quite hard to dress.
Show off.
And no, they're a nightmare, but I'm very jealous. And I think that I probably wouldn't have had the puff sleeves attached. I probably would have gone for something just a little bit less sort of girly, because, you know, you've got the bosoms and then you've got the sleeves and then it's just a lot of puff.
But there is something sad about the secrecy, though, isn't there? I mean, any wedding is a public event. It's a public statement of your love and your commitment.
No, it's romantic. The secrecy is romantic.
I know. I just think doing it with no...
Isn't eloping romantic? It's almost
exactly.
like that,
It's like,
isn't it?
oh, we don't know, we love each other, we don't need to have everyone
The
here.
royal family, you know, they're Britain's first family, and everything should be done in public. And there's something to me
Are you not just
right
cross that you
about...
didn't get any pages
Yeah, you just
out of
didn't
it?
get the scoop, Richard. That's the problem.
I just think there's something slightly kind of seedy about getting married in secret. You know, it should be out there.
I think that's a bit harsh.
No, I think definitely the secret wedding is not right.
Last week, Buckingham Palace released their own brand of gin, and we thought, what better excuse than a wedding to get some in to toast the happy couple. And as sort of as if by the magic of television, we have it right in front of us now. Here's the little bottle. It's not really...
Does it come in a normal size?
What I would
just...
call... Can you imagine presenting that bottle of gin to the Queen Mother back in her day?
I don't think that's been a wash.
That's not even half a cheekful.
It smells quite nice.
Made with botanicals from the gardens of Buckingham Palace.
Oh, that is actually really nice. And I say that as not someone who naturally reaches for a gin.
It's very weak. I can't really tell.
Oh, see, maybe it's a good measure for me.
I think it's just, I think probably because, I mean, I'm probably quite an accomplished gin drinker, I would say.
Well, the Queen drinks, I think, 1 part gin to 2 parts Dubonnet.
She does, yeah.
Rebecca, you're not normally a gin girl. Got a verdict?
No, I haven't had a glass, but I do have, if you can see it, my special mug. I drink my tea out of each morning, and I do have another bottle here.
That wasn't the only royal produce we taste tested for you on the show, but I'm sorry to say I wasn't around for this one. Jess King was standing in for me this week when we tasted Charles's Highgrove Honey.
That is exquisite, I've got to say. Well,
Richard,
it's not
do you
honey,
have a honey on crusty bread?
Now, my mother, who loves her honey, would say, what pollen?
It's actually from a red-twigged lime tree hedgerows,
There you are.
which grow in spring.
Who
so
knew?
there we go. And how much would you guess this gorgeous jar of honey costs?
I do know it's an extortionate £25.
It is indeed.
Is it?
I mean, £25 for
No.
this.
I'm not sure I'd pay that, but it would make a great present, and apparently it comes with a private message from the prince.
Ah, well, it depends what the message is then, I guess.
Well, I think for £25, I quite like Prince Charles to serve it on a golden platter, you know.
Well, after all that, here's something to put you off your lunch, and it came about during a chat about Prince Charles and his fascination with Romania.
He had judged a scything competition in Romania and spoken in an interview about how impressed he was with this traditional farming technique. Obviously something that is also done in poldark. And so the Mail mocked up a picture of Prince Charles topless, as a topless poldark with Prince Charles's head on. And I remember that very vividly.
Of course, many of our guests here on Palace Confidential have some great stories about meeting members of the royal family and visiting the palaces. But somehow no one tells it quite like my friend Kathy Lett.
I mean, Joe and I actually met, this is so hilarious, at Buckingham Palace.
We did.
Because when the Queen was taking her last overseas trip, she wanted to get her ear into the Aussie lingo. So she had all the Aussies down to Buck House for a bit of a Barbie, you know. And
I don't remember the Barbie, but yeah.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
Hugh Jackman was there, and I think Kylie was there, and was Kate there? I mean,
yeah.
all the kind of, the Gumleaf Mafia. And I had been working that day, I was very busy, and I suddenly thought, oh God, I've got to get to the palace, what will I wear? And I suddenly remembered I had this little suit with corgis on it. Corgis with tiaras with diamante encrusted, you know, pearls on there, on the tiara. So I whacked that on, I drove to the palace, and I ran upstairs, and the Queen was in a rictus of boredom. She'd been meeting Australians for hours, you know, she looked so all too tedious. And I rocked up in my little corgi suit, and I said, I hope you like this suit. I wore it just for you, although I'm slightly worried that one of your corgis might mate with my leg. And all the courtiers went, and she went, she went, oh, Philip, they're coming home, it's rather funny. And Philip came over, and he just went to me, get on with your girl, you know, and he was protecting her from my sense of humour. So I thought he was going to boomerang me back to Botany Bay, but he didn't. So I think he kind of protects her in that way. Like,
the bouncer.
Well, you're wearing your tiara today, so I'm sure Her Majesty would appreciate that.
We love a royal anecdote so much that we made a regular feature of it. We asked a number of former palace staff to tell us what life was really like at the palace. And here's a couple of our favourites from Dickie Arbiter and Ken Worf in two very special, never-before-seen editions of Behind Palace Doors. It's a special treat for you for sticking with us right to the end of our 50th episode. From all of us here at Palace Confidential, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year.
I think most people will know by now, since I retired from Buckingham Palace, even when I was there, I always worn these bright ties. And it's a bit of a trademark. And I was at a reception at Buckingham Palace a while ago, and having worked there, I paid respects to the Queen and spoke to her, and we had quite a good chat. I like to think I was reasonably popular with her. I retired, I wasn't fired, or I didn't resign to go off somewhere else. And as I took my leave, she said, quite matter-of-factly, I still see you're wearing those dreadful ties. So it was rather nice. It was said light-heartedly. It was said with a bit of a giggle. I always thought she didn't pay any attention to my ties, but obviously she did, and noticed them, and took that opportunity to call them dreadful. I don't think they're dreadful. I think they're rather colourful.
William had said to me on the first weekend we'd actually went to Highgrove, their place in Gloucestershire. He came up to me one morning and said, when I was working with Diana, I said, Ken, we've got to go out of the house. And I said, what do you mean we've got to go out of the house? He said, we've got to go out of the house, Ken. I said, no, William, we go out of the house. We don't go out of the house. He said, no, that's what Papa says. I said, well, okay. I said, but, you know, we go out of the house. We don't go out of the house. Anyway, we did go out of the house, and we came back in the house. And it was a week later that I'm sat in the kitchen at Highgrove, and the Prince of Wales walks in. Anyway, we all stood up as we did. You know, morning, Royal Highness. He said, oh, he said, good morning. And there was a silence. And he looked at me and he said, I gather that you've been giving William some elocution. And I thought, I said, I think I know what you're referring to, sir. I said, the other week, I said, William came up to me and suggested that the princess wanted to go out of the house. And I was actually saying to him that it was perhaps out and house rather than out and house, and digging myself further into this hole. And then he has this incredible way of ending it, and sort of this grimace appeared on his face. And then suddenly he said something that I thereafter heard so many times. And it was the way that he said it, the inflection that was classic. He just looked at me in the straight of the face. He said, oh, really? And that killed it dead.